But we again this hour lead with the Russia-Ukraine conflict and start with Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has said the US administration is making energetic and sincere efforts to resolve the conflict in Ukraine and suggested that Moscow and Washington could reach a deal on nuclear arms control. Speaking at a Kremlin meeting with senior military and civilian officials, Putin said discussions with the United States are aimed at creating long-term conditions for peace between our countries in Europe and in the world as a whole, if agreements on strategic offensive weapons are reached in later stages. Putin is due to meet US President Donald Trump in Alaska on Friday. The New START treaty, the last remaining pillar of US-Russia nuclear arms control, limits deployed strategic nuclear weapons and is set to expire in February next year.
Уважаемые коллеги, добрый день. Попросил вас сегодня собраться для того, чтобы проинформировать о том, как идет переговорный процесс по украинскому кризису, как идут переговоры в двухстороннем формате с украинской делегацией. Так или иначе, многие из присутствующих знают, разумеется, в общих чертах, но я расскажу поподробнее. Это первое. И второе, рассказать о том, на каком этапе мы находимся с американской администрацией сегодняшней, которая, как всем хорошо известно, предпринимает, на мой взгляд, достаточно энергичные и искренние усилия для того, чтобы прекратить боевые действия, прекратить кризис и выйти на договоренности, представляющие интерес для всех вовлеченных в этот конфликт сторон, для того, чтобы создать долгосрочные условия мира и между нашими странами, и в Европе, да и в мире в целом, если мы к следующим этапам выйдем на договоренности в области контроля над стратегическими наступательными вооружениями. Это то, что я хотел сказать.
Well, these comments, of course, come just ahead of an extremely pivotal meeting and a war that has raged for over 3 years. President Trump and President Putin sitting down one-on-one to discuss how to get closer to peace in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Of course, a lot of developments today we've been following throughout the day and bringing those to you. Volodymyr Zelensky meeting with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, this coming a day after a meeting with European leaders and President Donald Trump, in which they're looking at safety guarantees for Ukraine. Of course, Donald Trump's rhetoric on this conflict has flipped and changed throughout the last few months. So that meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky in the White House, of course, an extreme blow-up of relations between the US and Ukraine, which saw a brief pause on military aid, with Donald Trump asking Volodymyr Zelensky to pay back all of the US aid that had been sent. That has since changed. Of course, Donald Trump putting a deadline on Russia to try and get this war ended. It was initially 50 days, brought down to 10 to 12, and then a deadline did pass, but this meeting, of course, announced. It is hugely pivotal in this conflict. There are so many nations that have been involved, allies of Ukraine, allies of Russia, also contributing to the war effort, but also aid and defensive weapons as well. We are now joined by Helena Yanchenko, who is a member of Parliament, joining us live from Ukraine. Helena, thank you ever so much for taking the time to speak with us. Some clear points from Vladimir Putin's comments which I want to raise. He says that the US administration is making energetic and sincere efforts to end this conflict. In your eyes, is Putin trying to butter up Donald Trump before this meeting?
I am quite convinced that an only interest of Putin is to continue the war. And by all these statements, saying and tricks, he's just trying to buy more time. This is basically the first time when Putin agreed to actually have some kind of talks and negotiations. He used to ignore the previous attempts to have any negotiations moderated by someone like US or, let's say, our friends from Saudi Arabia, or etc., etc. But when President Trump has started to talk about real consequences, about secondary sanctions, Russia realized that they will be cut out of financial resources. And currently we see that Russia has enough of human resources to continue aggressive war of aggression in Ukraine. They have enough of defense or military resources, but what they are really dependent on is financial resources. Last year, they spent $150 billion on this bloody war in Ukraine. And they basically have sponsors of this war. This war is sponsored by international trade. Once again, last year, only India and China, only these two countries, bought oil from Russia worth of $115 billion. So it's almost the same amount of money which Russia has spent on the bloody war in Ukraine. By that, we can actually say that it's trade with India and China which sponsors this war. And that's why secondary sanctions, so basically the idea to give all other countries in the world a choice, you either cooperate with Russia, you trade with Russia, you help Russia sponsor the war, or you trade with the rest of the world. So these secondary sanctions, in my opinion, is an only real tool to force Russia to stop the war. And when President Trump raised this issue, Putin has changed his rhetoric right away, and he started to talk about conditions to end the war. He agreed to travel around and meet Trump to discuss the end of the war, etc., etc.
Yes, and of course that question over secondary sanctions continues to be raised, with only India so far hit with higher tariffs. So the effectiveness of that ploy still being brought into question. Let's look broader now at this meeting between Trump and Putin. From a Ukrainian perspective, is this seen as a turning point or further rhetoric?
Of course it is seen. And we Ukrainians, we are sick and tired of this war. You should understand that Ukrainians suffer. Mothers like me, I have children, like small children, they are 8 and 13. They became refugees because of the war. Millions of families are separated. Thousands of families, civilians, are killed during the night because of Russian attacks that are taking place over the past 3.5 years. Thousands of people are being kidnapped on the occupied territories and tortured later on. Thousands of children are being kidnapped from their families on the occupied territories. So this is not a joke. This is the bloodiest war since the World War II in the world. And we are the victims, and we have to fight back for 3.5 years. So we are sick and tired. We want this war to be over. We were ready to do anything, everything to end this war. But Russia goes on. And Russia has enough of funds because of the trade, because they trade their oil and gas, including trading with India and China, and it helps to sponsor this ongoing war, and it helps to sponsor this terrorism that they commit in Ukraine against poor civilian Ukrainians, against children, against women, against people who did nothing, innocent civilians.
Helena, if you do stay with us, thank you for that insight and those comments. If you stay with us as we bring another development